From what I know about Turning Point, it seems to be a political organization with conservative Christian values. If I were to not put any spin on it and just try to be very factual about it, I think that's what it is. And me personally, I'm a big fan of free speech. I don't see it any different as the Young Democrat Club or the Young Republican Club. And you want to have a club there like that, then those kids need a voice. And shame on those adults that dox those kids, that put their information out there, that publicize that. The Spring Branch ISD Police Department's not taking it lightly. Welcome to episode 89 of the Weekly Docket, a podcast by the Silberman Law Firm where we talk legal news and practical law. Today is September 25th, 2025. I'm Phil Silberman, owner of the firm and your host. And I'm joined by Chris Hild, who's the firm's supervising attorney. Chris, what happened to our Astros?
I was just thinking about that because in the middle of the summer, I told you, I said, Phil, I'm optimistic. You said, Chris, that is not what you said at the beginning of the season. And then I had to go back to that first week when we were at the game and you said, are we going to be good this year? And I was like, I wanted us to be good. Fromber did Fromber things. He melted down. The offense has gone so completely cold. It's unbelievable. I stayed up till midnight last night to try to watch them score a run. Have no excuse. They tried. The team is in shambles. We'll try again next year.
Okay. There you go. Good analysis. I'm hearing it's an injury thing. We're just been plagued by injuries. Probably.
That's nonsense. Every team is plagued by injuries. Jeremy Pena is not going to turn this team around. Okay. Yordan Alvarez is not going to turn this team around. It's nice to have those guys. I love those guys, but we have Correa, we have Altuve. The pitching is supposed to be doing what the pitching is doing. And the pitching's it's been good, but 0 runs.
No.
You got to score some runs. Yordan Alvarez is not going to come in and score 7 runs. I'm sorry.
You got to have an offense. All right. We are a legal show, so we need to talk about legal things. And on our docket today, we're going to be talking about law school applications are surging yet again.
Oh.
And then in a legal question section, we've got, when do I need 2 companies? ChatGPT told me I should have a holding company and an operating company. Do I really need both? And then in our Rant and Rave section, we've got a local high school, that Stratford High School. Chris, you may have heard of it. And the kids there are trying to create a Turning Point USA chapter, and it's big issues. There have been some doxing going on, and Ken Paxton's coming down and holding some kind of event for kids and all that. It's a big political deal. We'll talk about it. Okay. All right, let's get it kicked off with our legal news section. And this is talking about law school applications surging again. 10 law schools have already reported their largest ever classes this fall. Some of them, Alon, I don't know if you've heard of that. I think it's a school in North Carolina. Harvard, you've heard of that one. And so just big law school classes. Chris, what do you think? We need more lawyers, less lawyers, or we're good?
We need fewer lawyers, for sure.
Okay.
I don't know if that's a hot take, an unpopular opinion, but there's definitely more than enough lawyers.
In a couple of years past, when everybody got out of law with the whole COVID thing, and I felt like there was a shortage of lawyers. Maybe we needed more lawyers then, but you were not fazed by that. You still think generally we have too many lawyers?
Yeah, I think in general we do, because I think that oversaturation of the market leads to lower quality. I think it leads to people who are, let me give my whole thought here. There used to be a time where people hesitated to hire lawyers, right? I think the world is changing where now everybody goes and hires a lawyer really quickly because it's more accessible, it's less expensive. So people are hiring lawyers for everything. Anybody who wants to hang a shingle can. Don't think this is the integrity the profession was meant to have. And so I think having too many lawyers and too much access to lawyers at a low price, and I don't mean that to sound like, hey, if you're low income, you shouldn't have a lawyer. I just mean you shouldn't be able to just go put a couple $100 down and have a lawyer fire off a nonsensical letter to your neighbor who you don't like. I think it's out of control, and I think it demeans the integrity of the profession.
All right. You're a big integrity guy, so I respect that. 18% increase in the applicant pool in 2025. Still below the 2010 figures during the Great Recession. So anytime you have a huge economic downturn, well, the normal response is everybody to go to grad school like law school. That's why you see those big surges during recessions. So if that holds true, we're potentially looking at an oversaturated lawyer job market in 2028, which is completely against projections firms are throwing out there. Law firms out there are saying we're actually going to need less lawyers in 2028 because AI is removing the need for having so many entry level lawyers. I see that happening at our firm. I think we're getting more efficient with using AI and chat GPT. I think we're needing less transactional lawyers. I know, Chris, you may agree, disagree, but what do you think about the idea you're going to have this mismatch, all these applicants coming out of law school in 2028, and maybe we don't need so many entry level? I guess you agree because you think we don't need as many lawyers, period.
Yeah. And I think it's a disservice to the people too, to just keep giving law degrees to people when the work's not there. I think it's irresponsible. And again, not to make any enemies or call out any law schools, but opening new law schools in Texas, then just giving out law degrees when we already have an oversaturation of lawyers just doesn't seem good for those kids. It doesn't seem good for the public. I'm a big laissez-faire capitalist guy, but I also like people taking a little bit of responsibility and saying, yeah, maybe this isn't the best thing.
Yeah, and there's also a weakening labor market at this time. You got a lot of professional unemployment, very tough labor market for professional services, which lawyers fall into that. If you didn't have healthcare in the United States, where we're just aging and needing all of this healthcare, the labor market would even be worse. But here's a little optimism. Here's a counterpoint. Are you familiar with the term legal desert, Chris? Have you heard that term before?
I don't believe I have.
Okay, so a legal desert is basically in a big state like Texas, you have entire areas that are underserved by attorneys. Now, that sounds again counterintuitive because we have so many lawyers, but most of those lawyers are located in places like big markets like Houston, DFW area, Austin, San Antonio. When you get into some of the second tier markets like Corpus, Waco, or even smaller rural areas, the idea is that you don't have enough lawyers. Now, Chris, I don't mean certain kinds of lawyers, but for example, if you go to any small town in Texas, in the town square, you may have 3 law offices that all practice plaintiffs, criminal, and family, and those kinds of areas. But Chris, if you need somebody like us, like a real estate lawyer or a business lawyer or a probate lawyer in a place like, I don't know, San Angelo, Texas, that's going to be very hard to find. Chris, what do you think about being a young person? Or would you be willing to move to San Angelo or Waco or Corpus Christi and practice probate law?
No, I've definitely, maybe not those towns, but like you talk about even the smaller towns, like
Mm.
retiring in Fredericksburg and being one of 3 attorneys, but I just don't know that there's enough work. I would think that would be the issue. That, yeah, they are underserved when it comes to high level this or that, but it's
Mm.
also because they don't really need high level this or that. The reason it works in the big cities is because there's so many people, there's enough to support it. It would be interesting. I agree with you. You drive through those towns, you see there's 3 attorneys. Smaller towns like the ones you talk about, Corpus Christi, that would be interesting. I've run across attorneys in those cities. They seem to have competent attorneys there. So I'm curious what issues they're running into.
Yeah, you may be on to something on some of these smaller towns that are benefiting from a little bit of urban sprawl. If you take a place, us being in Houston, but you take a place like Waller, Texas or Hempstead, Texas, and it's close enough to Houston where you might be able to, especially with the internet and the online practice of law, capitalize from practicing in a big market, but also make yourself available to people in a smaller town that want to go into the town square and see their lawyer. So you may be able to get the best of both worlds. And you're then serving an underserved community in far northwest of Houston. So there's some of that going on. So maybe there's some opportunities, but generally speaking, a lot of kids going to law school right now. And we'll see how that shakes out, whether how AI is going to affect that and what the labor market turns out and what 2028 looks like. All right, that brings us to our legal question section. And here's our legal question. When do I need two companies? ChatGPT told me I should have a holding company and an operating company. Chris, general thoughts on this?
Contrary to the way the show usually runs, I'm going to let you do the heavy lifting on this one.
Okay. So the short answer on this deal is when you have a business where the services provided can be easily separated from the assets the business owns, that's when you really are going to benefit from having a holding company and a operating company. Chris, we talked about hunting. People that want to hunt, they buy properties, they want to have friends out, but they don't want to get sued. So what they do, and what we have done in the past, is we create a holding company for the land, and then we create an operating company that operates hunting excursions on the land where there's a lease in between. The idea being that you're shielding the land from liability. In case some accident happens in hunting, you blame the operating company. That way, when the plaintiff attorney comes along and sues the operating company, it's going to be more difficult to get to the holding company. The landlord who holds the property gets to say, look, I wasn't running the hunting excursion. That's the kind of a classic example. Another example is oil and gas equipment companies. You have some very expensive equipment and you're leasing it out to oil and gas companies, and that do very dangerous things, and that equipment needs to be maintained. So the holding company maybe owns all the equipment, but the operating company agrees to do all the maintenance and all the operations. So if there's ever a lawsuit, you can't get to the valuable equipment. Those are the examples. Does it really work? The theory is definitely there. You're at least going to have the defense. You're going to discourage the plaintiff, I think, a little bit. You're going to make it a little more challenging for them to get at the assets. Chris, what do you think?
It sounds legit, and also you can't get too tricky. We're not going to let you call something different when it's not really different.
Yeah.
It seems like it also has tax benefits too, though. If you're able to charge the rent, that helps reduce expenses. But maybe not. Maybe you're still paying just through the other company on those. That's one of the reasons they did it.
There are definitely some tax benefits to it. A lot of people, you want your operating company to be able to deduct the lease payments to the holding company. So there are definitely some tax benefits to it. Restaurants do it all the time. Sometimes restaurants will own their dirt, and they'll have a holding company for the actual restaurant property, and the operating company is who's running the restaurant. That's why if someone slips and falls and the holding company doesn't get sued. And that probably makes sense. So yeah, that answers that question. ChatGPT is not completely wrong on that one and can be a good idea. But if you have a services business where you can't really separate any assets, then that doesn't make sense. Okay. All right. That brings us to my favorite part of the show, which is our Rant and Rave section. And we're talking about an offshoot of the Charlie Kirk tragedy, where you now have a lot of young conservative people that are motivated to go and start Turning Point USA chapters at their campuses, college campuses, high school campuses. Turning Point USA was Charlie Kirk's organization. He was the founder, has a Republican political bent. And kids are out there and they're wanting to start these Turning Point USA clubs. Chris, but as to start a club at any high school, you typically have to have a teacher sponsor. And down the road from us at Stratford, these young conservative kids wanted to start the club, and they could not find one teacher to sponsor the club. Now, I think eventually they were able to find somebody, but you can imagine why teachers would be reluctant to sponsor a club like that in light of what's just happened. The teacher may not want the controversy. All the teachers in academia may be incredibly liberal and not have any interest in it. But I think they eventually were to find a sponsor. But what happened is this then liberal activists motivated, I think, some adults to dox these kids. Are you familiar with the term doxing?
Somewhat, probably not exactly. So I don't think I can weigh in. I think it's sharing personal information of some sort.
Yeah. You just put some of their info online. So you've got some young kids, and these liberal activists, I guess, were upset with that the kids got the club started. So they put their information out somewhere on the internet or social media, wherever that was. and saying, look at these kids. These are the conservatives in your school, or these were the teachers that sponsored the kids, or whoever. Some of the group that was a proponent of the Turning Point USA, they had their information put out there. Here's a question for you, Chris. For years, we've had the young Democrat and the young Republican club. Do you see this as different?
It could be perceived as different. I don't know much about it. If they're doing it in an antagonistic way, then maybe it is. I don't know. I think you're right. Again, what I'm familiar with is young Republicans, young Democrats, just people like us in high school that wanted to be politically active, that loved watching the news, getting involved in elections. And by getting involved, I just mean knowing about it, not actually going door to door. But just news junkies that loved politics. There's going to be a little bit of weight behind Turning Point. It's not just young Republicans. It's going to carry a little bit more, maybe a little bit more antagonistic towards another side. I don't know how they did it in this case, but I can also see academia does skew liberal. So it may be tough to find a teacher that would want to be there. But I assume even if it skews towards the left, there's going to be some people on the right that would be willing to lead a student group like that. Interesting.
From what I know about Turning Point, it seems to be a political organization with conservative Christian values. If I were to not put any spin on it and just try to be very factual about it, I think that's what it is. And me personally, I'm a big fan of free speech. I don't see it any different as the Young Democrat Club or the Young Republican Club. And you want to have a club there like that, then those kids need a voice. And shame on those adults that dox those kids, that put their information out there, that publicize that. The Spring Branch ISD Police Department's not taking it lightly. And I looked this up because I did not know a lot about doxing. It's specifically covered under Texas Penal Code Section 42.074, relatively new law enacted in September 2023. And it basically criminalizes the unlawful disclosure of a residential address or a telephone number with the intent to cause harm or harassment. Now, I don't know if you just put the names out there, that's considered doxing. I don't know that. If you look at the statute, it seems like it needs to include a telephone number or a residential address. Obviously, we're a little bit sensitive because these are minors here involved, Chris. And there's probably some more specific laws dealing with minors. You always know when there's a tragedy, when there's a minor injured or even a minor that's been accused of a crime, Chris, that you're not really allowed to reveal those identities. You've seen that before. I bet there's an element of that's going to interplay here with this Texas Penal Code section on doxing for certain.
Yeah, and no doubt. You don't mess with minors. That's a bad deal.
Yeah.
I don't know who thought it would be a good idea. If you are a minor and you're doing it, it's probably not as harsh, but as an adult taking action, even if they're 17 and they walk, talk, and act like adults, they're still not adults.
Yeah, still absolutely minors. So got to protect our minors. I applaud those kids at Stratford for speaking their mind and exercising their right to free speech. And I applaud the adults that were able to be courageous and sponsor that club. And I also hope and pray that sort of some of the divisiveness in schools like that in the country starts to simmer down and we can have honest and respectful discourse is what we really need and want. All right, that brings our show to a close. I've been your host, Phil Silverman. Chris has been my co-host. Like us, follow us, review us wherever you get your podcast. And as a reminder, nothing in this show is to be considered legal advice, and this has all been for entertainment purposes only. If you have a legal question, email us at info@silblawfirm.com. That's info@tileb, like boy, lawfirm.com. Tell us you want it publicly answered in the podcast. Everybody have a great rest of your week and weekend.